Hello again. My name is Teodora Marija Grigaité, and I'm truly delighted to be here. My presentation called Challenging and Chortling, a philosophical account of humor's antagonistic nature, explores humor from a philosophical perspective. I look forward to sharing my insights and engaging in discussions with all of you afterwards. So in my presentation, I argue that the dominant modern perspective on humor is polluted by ideological positivist stances, rendering it inherently one-sided and selective. This leads to an uneven emphasis on different manifestations of humor, with its darker aspects often acknowledged only pro forma. This flawed outlook is then transposed into philosophical theories of humor and comedy, where humor is frequently treated as an ahistorical entity. Even late 20th and early 21st century theories exhibit this textual blindness. Instead of analyzing specific theories, I will set the stage to reveal how humor is glamorized and the antagonism, fundamental opposition between humor's positive and negative side, is neutralized. This presentation might suggest that perhaps I hate humor, but don't be fooled. I love humor too much not to let it constantly be praised. Or in Michael Billig's words, I say, why not be anti-humor? There are worse crimes. This presentation will be structured as follows. First, I will attempt to demonstrate humor's ahistorical stance by antithetically contrasting it with its historical development and dialectics in the Western world. Second, I will introduce key concepts from Michael Billig's oeuvre that will be helpful in initiating the critique of how humor is perceived. Third, I will engage with Alenka Zupancic's and her contemporary Mladen Dolar's ideas on modern manifestations of humor as a new form of racisation. Fourth, building on a critique of the already transformed landscape of humor, since both Zupancic and Billig wrote their key work on the subject, I will provide my own insights into how humor has evolved while still being perceived as a solely positive force in the Western Hemisphere. So I begin with a brief exploration of the genesis of the term humor in the hopes of demonstrating that it is not a static concept in our current life world. By doing so, I aim to make it more flexible, allowing for a deeper understanding of its dialectical nature. This analysis is based on Daniel Wickberg's book, The Senses of Humor, which traces the historical evolution of the concept of humor and its cultural significance. The evolution of the term humor reflects significant shifts in understanding personhood and individuality. Originally rooted in humoral medicine, where it referred to bodily fluids that govern temperament, the term gradually evolved. By the 15th century, humor began to signify an individual's temperament, often associated with eccentricity due to an imbalance of humors, meaning the liquid. In the 17th century, thinkers like Thomas Hobbes reshaped the understanding of laughter, emphasizing it as a psychological reaction based on self-comparison with others. Laughter moved from being a passive response to an external object to an active human-driven expression. At the same time, concepts like ridicule, raillery, and banter redefined laughter as an active social process. The distinction between wit and humor further evolved during the 18th century. Figures like John Dryden viewed humor as unworthy of gentlemen and tied it to madness, while others like Corbin Morris championed humor for its connection to everyday life and democratic values. This divide marked the growing cultural shift from elitism to an appreciation of the ordinary. A significant trend emerged from the 18th century forward, where the understanding of laughter shifted from a general antipathetic meaning to the neutrality of incongruity, and then to a sympathetic understanding. By the 19th century, sympathy was viewed as a key component of laughter. The cultural formation of the term sense of humor was complex. For this concept to emerge, several shifts had to occur. First, the meaning of humor transitioned from a physiological to characterological, and finally to a subjective, discursive one. Second, laughter was no longer simply a reaction to external objects, but became tied to the activities of the mind. Finally, the rise of a middle-class sensibility emphasized the internal ability to judge, giving birth to the modern understanding of the sense of humor. This brings me to the current climate and humor's position within social sphere. I would like to introduce humor theorist Michael Billig's work, primarily his seminal book, Laughter and Ridicule, towards a social critique of humor. He examines how various perspectives, from self-help books to psychiatry and academic theories on humor, reflect common sense assumptions and ideological biases, particularly by emphasizing its benefits. Following this simplified perspective, I introduce three key ideas concerning humor and its relation to contemporary social life. These concepts are ideological positivism, textual repression, and embarrassment's relation to humor. The former, according to Billig, I quote, is part of a more general perspective in which the positives of life are to be stressed. This is ideological positivism that represents an optimistic, can-do outlook in a society that offers its inhabitants the dream of constant, positively productive pleasures. The cruelties of this social order are overlooked, as if there is an imperative to wish away negatives. End of quote. So Billig draws from Herbert Marcuse's critique of neo-Freudians, particularly his former colleague Erich Fromm, who, according to Marcuse, lost his critical edge in later work. Marcuse argued that Fromm's psychology had become little more than platitudes, promoting the idea that one should accentuate the positive in life. Billig, following Marcuse, contend that this approach is deeply ideological, serving to reinforce the status quo by ignoring the negative or oppressive aspects of the society. This stance brings me to a second idea that illustrates how a challenge for research is created. The primary way to assess an era's attitude towards humor is through academic studies. Yet these studies often lack critical engagement with humor's complexities. Billig argues that, I quote, the less pleasant faces of humor, its so-called negatives, tend to be pushed aside. In some cases, this neglect is so striking that one might even talk of textual repression, end of quote. And lastly, piling on towards the critical attitude towards humor, I present a Billigian idea of a social theory that highlights the fundamental role of humor, specifically ridicule, in shaping social interactions. He argues that ridicule serves as a powerful cultural tool, reinforcing societal norms by discouraging deviant behavior. According to Billig, the vast majority of humor manifests as ridicule, whether mild, friendly, or harsh. This ridicule is closely tied to the experience of embarrassment, which is instilled during childhood. As he explains, I quote, fear of embarrassment makes us comply with the social order. It is the glue of social life, the substance that keeps the social world together. Babies are never embarrassed, and young children can rush about without the self-consciousness of adults. Somewhere along the line, we have to learn how to be embarrassed. This is where humor, or at least ridicule, comes in. It is through ridicule that embarrassment is learned. The fear of embarrassment continues to be related to the fear that others will laugh at us. If embarrassment lies at the heart of social life, then so must humor in the guise of ridicule. In consequence, humor, because it plays such a key role in the maintenance of social life, is much more important than social theorists have often assumed. End of quote. Thus, these three aspects of humor challenge the commonly accepted idea of its subversive nature, which often overshadows its darker, more disciplinary functions, which, according to Billig, lie at the heart of the social life. In a similar vein to Michael Billig, and within a comparable time frame, Billig wrote his book in 2005 and Zupancic in 2008. Alenka Zupancic criticizes the way humor and comedy are treated today. She argues that humor has become almost enslaved to the broader societal self-help mentality. However, unlike Billig, Zupancic does not claim that the essence of humor arises from a conservative desire to adhere to anachronistic or middle-class traditions. Instead, she divides humor, or as she prefers to call it, comedy, but it still has the same connotations, into ideological and subversive manifestations, dedicating her book called The Odd One In on comedy to extracting the real comedy. To support her argument and rescue humor slash comedy from its current enslavement, she invokes, so to speak, the big guns, Hegel and Lacan. Zupancic begins by pushing back against the idea that laughter or irony necessarily facilitates individual or communal freedom. Drawing from Mladen Dolar, a fellow theorist from the Ljubljana School of Psychoanalysis, Zupancic asserts that laughter can actually serve as a condition of ideology. Rather than providing liberation, laughter creates a space in which it can fully take hold of us. In this moment of apparent freedom, we become subjects, with ideology working through its own mechanisms to make us feel as though we are freely choosing, when in reality, we are under the influence. A relevant example from my region would be how, for example, Soviet Union nomenclature ordered the publication of a satirical magazine. It's called The Sweep, I think, in English. In Lithuanian, it would be called Šluota. So this magazine was supposed to mock those in power in order to reduce resistance. And actually it worked. The humor allowed people to feel a sense of liberation, yet ultimately reinforced the authority of the regime by keeping dissent within controlled, acceptable bounds. According to Zupancic, in contemporary society, humor has taken on new forms, now tied to the cult of successful and positive individuals. The problem lies in how success is increasingly seen as a biological trait, leading to a form of racization. The poor are no longer viewed as a socioeconomic class, but as a separate race or distinct way of life. This represents a shift from traditional racism, which involves hatred of different races, to a new form of racism based on economic and class differences. Contemporary racism naturalizes these distinctions rather than attributing them to social factors. This shift helps explain the rise of ideologies focused on private life, lifestyle choices, and habits. For example, the growing obsession with daily routines believed to lead to success, such as waking up early, thinking positively, and finding humor even in darkest circumstances. It all reflects this trend. We are witnessing the naturalization of economic, political, and social differences, which is itself a political process. This naturalization promotes the idea that these differences are inherent to life and reality itself. Contemporary discourse often distances itself from explicit ideologies, presenting to the current socioeconomic reality as a natural fact that we must simply accept and adapt to. The emphasis on happiness, positive thinking, and cheerfulness serves to reinforce this thinking. Comedy, too, plays a role in this
5
process.
minutes are left.
Okay.
5
Comedy,
minutes are
yeah,
left.
plays a role in this process, promoting satisfaction and positive feelings. Hollywood's vast production of comedies, romantic, dark, teen, etc., is a reflection of this trend. Yet true comedy is possible, but it remains rare, and nothing may be more hostile to the comic spirit than a culture that values entertainment, happiness, and naturalization of social relations. So after presenting Michael Billig's and Alenka Zupancic's views on humor, I suspect that not all of you have been convinced, as these theories too, they were shaped by their historical context. I mean, if a historical context can be called 2010s. It was a time almost excessively driven by the need for a smiley, laughing facade, regardless of the situation. Yet I believe we can feel the pulse of humor's dialectics, be the witnesses of changing communal attitude towards it, especially among younger generations influenced by social media platforms, where different displays of humor form the worldview. Humor is evolving. Familiar cliches like it's just a joke no longer hold the same weight. Today, humor takes on a more absurdist or dark form, aligning with the growing disillusionment with, say, the notions of career, family, the state, etc. A few decades ago, we saw a cult of positivity, but now there's a shift towards an emphasis on raw emotions, or in other words, affective capitalism takes place. Younger generation in particular seeks authenticity, edginess, and nonconformity in the self-presentation. And humor, especially dark humor, resonates with these values. By engaging in this humor, it is established as a distinct self-image, setting oneself apart from traditional norms and expectations. However, judging by the increasing disillusionment with the trend Billig and Zupancic described, we might return to Zupancic's critique of humor as irony and detachment. Today, humor is more embedded in the social fabric than ever, not as a marketing or propaganda tool, but as a prevalent form of communication used to display one's personality and moral stance. And if you are still not convinced, consider the statement that he or she does not have a sense of humor. Is this an objective, neutral observation, or is it a critique of someone lacking a quality that is almost an unspoken personal must in contemporary culture? My presentation was meant to set the scene for a rarely explored side of humor. As I am working with philosophical humor theories from the 20th century and 21st centuries, I have observed that many supposed objective definitions or theories carry the dead weight of their historical context, making it harder to grasp the essence of humor. Humor, which is often thought to be solely about the mechanics of an inner state reacting to amusing stimuli, sometimes carries positive connotations that it doesn't necessarily have to. For example, the famous humor theorist Stephen Gimbel describes humor as a conspicuous display of playful cleverness. From this definition, I see that humor is only viewed positively, which aligns with the current era, but limits its nuance. Yet the question remains, if a concept is so ambiguous, how is it possible to construct a theory that encompasses all of its manifestations? Thank you for listening.
Comments and
Sure.
Teodora, I would like to praise you for addressing these big issues, and we often focus just on analyzing one or two texts, and I recognize that you're trying to address the broader picture. However, I have to say your paper is about 20 years out of date. If you look today at what is happening, I would argue that the exact opposite has gone on. Okay, so just to give you an idea, there's a book by Weaver, which came out about 10 years ago, about racist humor. There is Perez's book on racist humor. I'm not saying that I necessarily agree with everything that these people say. You mentioned Gimbel. He's written a whole book about why telling some jokes is bad and it's a bad thing. Here's another book that I'm about to review for humor. 2/3 of my last book is about the use of humor by the alt-right to disseminate neo-fascist ideology and sexist, misogynist, racist, horrible humor. So to say that humor is only seen from a positive standpoint today, I'm sorry, that just doesn't fly. You know, again, I'm not saying that that you're not right. I mean, that is correct. In 2005, when Billig wrote his book, he was absolutely correct. Oh, and I forgot to mention Moira Marsh has been has been writing using Billig's work, has been writing some really interesting stuff about that. And of course, Elliot Oring had written about the use of humor by the Ku Klux Klan and other neo-Nazi movements in this country, etc. So yes, there was a bias towards positivity in humor, but the field has moved, and the field is now fully addressing the negative side of humor. In fact, you might even argue that we've gone overboard, and now, to say, oh, that's just a joke, people will jump on you and say, no, it's always a political expression, etc. I see Chris as another source, which I don't think I'd seen. So thank you, Chris, for that reference. So, I mean, again, I agree with your thesis, but I disagree with the fact that today there is no interest in the negative side of humor.
Thank you very much, Salvatore. I am aware of the fact, and I maybe know 30% of the works you have mentioned, but I'll ask you if you could to send me the headlines of it.
Yeah, absolutely, yes.
But my main theory, I haven't mentioned it. I just wanted to focus on this particular aspect, but I have distinguished rather main two currents of philosophical theories of humor in the 21st century, which are rather more technical ones that are attempting to encompass humor's essence, including its positive and negative aspects. So I'm aware of the fact that the negative aspects are being thought of. But then there's another current, and it's a very prevalent one, which I have roughly called a contemporary critical theories, which mainly predominantly focus on ideological forms of humor. So the ones you have mentioned, racist aspects, or the ones that adhere to societal norms. But there's a problem with these kind of theories. Then the essentialization of humor, or just the wish to grasp its essence, then it becomes a little bit in the background. And the technical theories, on the other hand, are too technical, and I attempt to establish a humor theory that could encompass the negative aspects of it, but also be also excel at the technical sides. So this is the problem I'm facing right now. But solely on this presentation, I wanted only to speak about the mentioned theories. Yeah. So, but thank you for your.
Thank you. Thank you. We have another, I think, comment or question from Chris Kramer.
Thank you. I'd like the paper very much. I wonder if somebody is presenting a case for the positive view of humor as a potential progressive, successful means of critiquing society or being an act of subversion, does that already presuppose that it could be equally used on the other end? I mean, to advocate for the power of humor as a mode of subversion is already to assume it can be used on the other end as well, as a mode of sustaining an unjust status quo, unless you define humor more narrowly as essentially in a play frame. And when one is engaging in racist, sexist, oppressive behaviors, even when tinged with humor, used as presumably non-ridiculing, or no, jokes that are meant to bring a laugh, that doesn't seem sufficient to count as humor just because it elicits laughter. It might be, we can define humor so narrowly that the moment it leaves a play frame, and how that's established is difficult, you're no longer engaged in humor, you're doing something else. And I'm not sure where Billig stands on that. He does seem to allow for humor as being ridiculing, and I think that's fine. But in a way, it seems like once you've accepted the power of it on one end, it presupposes the power as a weapon on the other.
Yeah, I don't have anything to add except that Alenka Zupancic kind of reconstructed her theory in a few years ago, and she also spoke about if we are speaking about political humor, so that the other side also weaponizes in a way. So the form in which different political stances, let's say, uses humor starts to resemble each other. So this is a very good comment.
We have 3 more minutes if there are any other comments. And in the chat box, we have a few comments, like we have comment from Amy Friedman. Excellent, fascinating work, much appreciated. And then Chris Kramer, he has suggested a book. And then is there any other one? And anyone else writing about racism of people failing in a capitalist society? And those poor people being the butt of jokes as a kind of racism. So if you could quickly answer these questions.
Racism of people failing in, I wonder if you could expand a bit on this question.
Oh, I was fascinated. Can you hear me?
Yes, I can.
I was fascinated with your comments about how jokes about our everyday life and habits that we have in a way is a kind of social pressure to behave a certain way that is considered successful. So I wanted to do some research on that. That's really got me thinking.
Okay. From the top of my head, I do not have anything, but I know that I have many of the PDFs in my folder. So if you could just write your email and I'll try to send it to you.
You could start from Bergson's theory of the humor as a social corrective, which goes
Of
back
course.
to Durkheim. So not new.
Yes.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Teodora. Thank you, everyone.
Dr. Empelman has his hand up.
Yeah. He wants to say something? Dr. Empelman, is there any comment from your side?
Yes, I did. Sure.
Yeah, sure.
Interesting talk. I invite you to my talk tomorrow, which will address that very same area. Grateful for the mention of the word weaponization, which I am highly allergic to, because it ascribes more power to humor at the macro level of societal interaction than I think it has definitely at the micro level of societal interaction. And I'm also allergic to worldviews, maybe sometimes theories, confirming themselves casually without actual examples on humor, versus research fueled by research questions that let you pick an appropriate theory and methodology to find data that let you falsify what you were looking for. And I think Billig, with his confusion of humor as all ridicule, is a prime example of starting from a worldview, confirming it, and humor researchers have gained nothing.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Dr. Hempelman. So our next presenter is Anthony.